Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome to Out with Dan. Today I'm so excited to talk with my buddy Wally White about his book, Christmas Travelers. Hi, Wally.
Hi.
I love it. You've got one too. That's fantastic.
I pulled this off the shelf and it's signed. I guess I thought in case somebody got one, they might as well have a signed copy.
Totally agree. It's worth a lot more. So this book is set at Christmas. Is that a favorite holiday for you?
It is, and it always has been for my whole family. My brother is such a Christmas nut of posting stuff on Facebook that when Harry Connick Jr. had his talk show, his producers actually found my brother on Facebook and made him part of a Christmas nut job, episode. So yeah, it's a family trait of ours, Christmas.
I totally love it. I love Christmas. I think it's so fun. So give us a setup of what the book is about.
It's basically a modern retelling of the Nativity story. And I paused for a second because the idea really came from years ago. I had this idea to write a script or really a TV Christmas movie for the cast of Touched by an Angel shortly after they had gone off they were done. And I thought, well, but they could come back for a movie. And but I had a writing partner and we had a learning experience about writing for characters that we did not own. And so the idea kind of went from what I had originally had for the Touched by an Angel group and then kind of developed into, well, what would that look like if it were all brand new characters that I really have the right to tell the story of. And so then it became about the journey and the traveling part of the nativity story, but in modern times. So airplanes are used and all of that sort of thing.
Well, I think that was a fun thing about it. When I first started off, all the characters do take an airplane ride. And I thought, well, a modern retelling of the nativity on an airplane could be problematic or fun.
Right. Right.
So let's get into your characters some. So one of your main characters is Nellie, who's a feisty old broad, and but she brings with her a lot of wisdom. And I really enjoyed reading her. And I got this sense that she knew exactly what she wanted. Sometimes she would make you pull it out of her, but she knew where she was going on her journey.
Right. Yeah. And, Nellie is, a couple of things about, you and I have a shared former friend in Della Reese, and Della's voice was always 100% in that character. And, but, I wanted to be sure that it wasn't Della, that it was this other person, but her voice and that kind of surety that came from that was always there in that. And but then the name Nellie I chose very specifically because that was Della's mother's name, and I had a great aunt with that name. In fact, in the book, Nellie's sister's name is Opal, and I had an Aunt Nellie and an Aunt Opal. So I kind of tied together some of that and some of this, and I wanted it to be, that's where Nellie is a singer and kind of a former famous person, but she's been out of the game long enough that she's not automatically recognizable. But that didn't mean that she doesn't stride with that same kind of stardom that, because that's who she is, so that's why she's described with her jewels on and her, all that stuff and her style. And I had such a great love, and I still do have such a great love for Della Reese that, I wanted all of that in that character.
I love that. I thought when I was reading, because as we've talked about, I knew it was a modern retelling of the Nativity. So there was something, of course, I can be a little daft at times. So, of course, when I got to Frank and Alanya, I'm thinking, oh, well, Alanya. But then, if I really thought about it long and hard, I might have realized it was a little different from that. But I thought Alanya's character spoke to me so much because you brought in Alanya that childlike wonderment of not only Christmas, but of everyday living. She was curious and she was talkative and she wasn't shy. And that was something beautiful. That is something children give us that sadly we sometimes grow out of as adults. Did you have
Yeah,
fun
and
writing her?
there are things that a child can and will say that you can't honestly get out of an adult. And so it's a nativity story, modern, but so there's going to be a baby around, and there's talk about a baby all the way through because the one character is pregnant, um, but you still, in the story we're telling right now, for a Christmas story especially, you just needed that child that can say and do things that are gonna really be part of a Christmas spirit story that you're not gonna get out of a room full of adults.
I totally agree. And I do, that is one thing about children that is so beautiful. They do bring a different perspective to it. And they have a curiosity that, I think adults have a curiosity too. I just don't think we have it quite as honestly as children often do. And so that's a beautiful thing. And I so enjoyed her voice in this part. So that was
Yeah.
wonderful. And then we have Charlie and Holly, who Holly is the vessel, I guess you could call it. And give us a little setup about what they're like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm from the South as you are too, and so I definitely wanted that Southern part because when I start talking about my favorite Christmas traditions and stuff, there's going to be some Southern stuff in there, so I wanted that in there. And Holly really became part of a lesson I'd learned after my dad passed away. That meant next Christmas, my dad died in August. This was back in '98, and then the Christmas after that, there were things that my mom didn't want to do,
Yes.
and I understand that in a different way now, 24 years later. But at the time, I was like, we gotta push on, we gotta carry on, we gotta do. And so it was about the lessons from that. Really, I was able to do through Holly and Charlie in that but it's Christmas and it has to be A, B, and C. Don't you know we've done D? And people getting so caught up into the it has to be this way or it's not Christmas. And then that really ended up being the driving force behind the whole story of like, this is the Christmas we've got.
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's make this Christmas as magical and wonderful as possible, as opposed to being upset that you're not going to have the exact same one you've had all these other times.
And I think that to sort of get a little metaphysical, I think that's a lesson we all learn in death and in grief that um, the person may not be physically there with us, but the spirit of what we had before, or maybe even their spirit is still with us. And that is something that I think that we all go through when there are changes in our lives. And it doesn't have to be death. It could be simply something as these two characters do. They've moved to a new city. So there's a death, if you will, of what it used to be like. And sometimes it does become extraordinarily difficult to figure out how do I put all of my past into my current so I will still enjoy the same holiday that I enjoyed before. And I think that is difficult often.
Right.
And I did notice that if they make it to Newark, which you and I have definitely both been through Newark, and it's lovely. But they do make their way to New York City, which, of course, I think that for most Americans, New York City is a fixture in the world of Christmas. because it's done so over the top. And of course, in my estimation, I think New York becomes yet another character. Did you feel that way in writing it?
Yeah, and I lived in New York for 5.5 years, and I have always said that I have three favorite months in New York City, and that's April and October because the weather is perfect, and then December because I think there's no city in the world that does Christmas any better than New York. I'm not saying other cities don't do it good, but I don't think anybody does it better than New York. And so there were so many things that I pulled from, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if they still do that. Like the giant Christmas balls in the water fountain there on Fifth Avenue. Like that's a real thing. I took time to write about it because I just love it. And I was thinking about it recently. I'm like, can I recreate that with like beach balls in my yard now that but
You
yeah,
can.
so yeah, right. So yeah, so there was, and I have been kind of trapped in Newark Airport for a full day, and I have walked the streets of New York when I ended up having to walk further and more uncomfortably than I had planned. Or, mine was like it was raining, and I always depended on never worrying about having an umbrella because in New York City, the second there's a drop, they all pull their crates out, and the umbrellas. These are old prices. The umbrellas that were selling for $5 are now suddenly $10, and you happily pay it. And like I was doing, and then suddenly this one day, there were no umbrellas, and now I'd already walked 10 blocks, and now I'm soaking wet by the time I see an umbrella, and I'm like, what's the point? I got 10 more blocks to walk. And, um, and I'm just dripping. And so, I used that for Jack and like this journey that she had to take that was not the journey she'd planned, and the uncomfortableness of it, but then also, kind of the fun stuff that comes from that.
Yes, and speaking of Jack, I do want to say for the world to know that Christmas time we should not impose on single people because single people might enjoy Christmas as much as married people.
Right.
Jack gets thrown into this trip because her boss wants this particular thing done, but the boss wants to stay home with the family. And I'm like, I might have been there once or twice in my life. I bet you have as well.
Right here. Yep. Yep. Oh, well, you can do it. Why? Because,
You don't have to worry about batteries for the kids' children or
right.
kids' toys and
Exactly.
stuff. So I'm like, okay,
Exactly.
yeah. So I try to disappear at Christmas and on my birthday. So whatever you need, you can do on your own because I'm
That's
not
it.
your responsible person.
Right. Absolutely.
So there is a foreword by Della Reese at the beginning of the book. Tell us how that came to be.
Yeah. So, my cousin, who was my editor on the book, as we were finishing up, she said, Della, do you think you could get her to give you a little clip? Just a little one sentence that would kind of go on the book cover. She said that might help since nobody knows who you are. It'd be nice to put the name of somebody that people know who they are. And she said, do you think you can get her to give you a little one sentence something? And I'm like, well, why don't I just ask her to write a foreword? And she said, oh, well, if you think she can do it. I'm like, they'll do just about anything for me because we had that kind of love for one another.
Yeah.
And so Della got a copy of the book that was literally, I printed it out of Word, so it was a big stack of paper, and I went and drove up, and they weren't at home, so I stuck that version of the book in her mailbox, and then a couple of days later they called and said, all right, here's your forward. So um,
Oh,
yeah, so she
that's so
loved it, and she recognized her voice in Nellie too, and so we both wanted her to play that part, but I still have yet to ever find somebody to say yes to a Christmas movie version.
You know what? Let's not give up hope. It can
That's it.
always happen.
That's it.
Wally, thank you so much. The book again is Christmas Travelers, and it's available on Amazon. Is that correct?
It is. That's kind of where it lives these days. But they get you a copy quick.
Lovely. I love it. Thank you so much for hanging out and chatting with me.
Yeah, thank you.
And do you have any kind of social media you want to share?
I'm on Instagram. There's a site called Wally White NC, as in North Carolina. And I'm on the TikTok. That's on I think it's currently Wally White Guy, like the white guy. So Wally
Okay.
White Guy, and so I'm there too. I let the little bluebird go. So those are the main two spots to find me these days.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I wish you great success and lots of love, and I will chat with you soon.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.